Hello and welcome to the Etch Play weekly live show. This is our 50th episode and that's a very exciting milestone. For anybody who has watched the show previously, you may know that it wasn't that long ago I myself turned 40 years old, and the idea of aging gaming, or ageless gaming as I like to say, has been a topic we've touched on previously. And as this is our 50th episode, you may have noticed I'm surrounded by some fantastic guests who are going to be joining me, and they are all in the age bracket of 50 plus. So that's our little theme time for today. And the reason this is an interesting subject for me, as I said, I kind of recently turned 40, and I been doing a lot of reflecting on that kind of milestone and how I actually consider it an extreme privilege to have witnessed almost the entirety of an industry. So from the very beginnings of video games, I wasn't quite there for the very beginnings of it, but certainly the mass adoption of video games and games in the home. And likewise with things like the internet and mobile phones, mobile gaming, all of these things. It's very unusual to be able to have been there from the start and still be seeing it evolve today. You think about any other industry, building, construction, art, they've been around for hundreds or thousands of years. So it's very exciting and it's very interesting, but we don't very often get the perspective from people who are perhaps at the later years of that journey. I reached out to a handful of lovely folk, and that's who have joined us today. So joining us, we've got Steve Ince. Hi Steve, thank you for joining us. So Steve has been involved in game design, narrative, art since 1993. Very experienced, very long tenure in the industry. We also have Kate Edwards. Kate, thank you very much for joining us. Kate is the Executive Director of Global Game Jam, previously Exec Director for the IGDA, the governing body. And last but by no means least, we have Haughty Chicken, who is a streamer tuning all the way in from Australia. So we've got Steve in the UK, Kate in the States, and Haughty who's in Australia. Really interesting sort of cross-section from across the industry. So I'm going to start off by kind of challenging the norms. Like, none of us are ashamed of our age. It's nothing that we're embarrassed about. So just folks, if you just say how old you are, that would be great. Steve?
Hello, I'm 63.
Thank you very much. And Kate?
56.
And Haughty?
I'm 59.
Excellent stuff. So that's really good, and really looking forward to this conversation with you folks and seeing getting your perspectives and learning from all your experience. So I'm going to kick us off with the question of what is your earliest games memory? So Kate, what would be your earliest games memory?
Well, I mean, besides a lot of analog games, obviously, like board games and card games, things like that, for me, the first video game that I remember was Pong. I believe I was 7 or 8 years old when I saw one. I grew up in Southern California, and we saw one of those old, wood cabinets with the yellow front Pong machines in a store in Southern California, and that was pretty much my first encounter with video games. And it was basically on par with the apes encountering the monolith in 2001. Just this incredible evolving experience.
Amazing, thank you. And Steve, how about yourself?
I remember whether it's, sort of like whether my first experience was Pong or something called Space Wars. When I was at university, we took a trip, because I was based in Newcastle, at Newcastle University, and we went out to a little place on the coast called Whitley Bay, and there was an arcade, there, and I discovered this game called Space Wars. And I threw tons and tons of 10 pences into that to play it. And it was just so addictive. I ran out of money. Not completely. I didn't bankrupt myself, but the money I had in my pocket that day.
I think
it was just brilliant. It was a great game.
That's a really interesting point about kind of arcades.
So there was that.
Excellent, thanks Steve. Yeah, really interesting. Arcades, kind of a lot of our earlier memories were the kind of coin operated experiences, which isn't really a thing today. I mean, you get them in fun fairs and things like that, but that was where you had to go to get a gaming experience, and you had to pay per play, and the games were almost designed to make you lose so that they could generate more money, whereas now games are designed to make you win so you keep playing them. So yeah, it's an interesting evolution. And Haughty, how about yourself? What was your earliest games memory?
I'm the same with Kate. Mine was Pong, and I was fortunate. My parents, I don't know how it happened, but we had it at home so we could play it through our TV, but it was in my parents' bedroom. So I have memories of being up the hallway in my parents' bed with my mother saying, "Come down this hallway. You've been there for hours and hours." I just couldn't stop. I was so transfixed, and I realised that's where my competitive nature started, right there with Pong that hasn't finished.
Excellent stuff. So those are the earliest memories. My next question, I wanted to know, obviously you've all got a great perspective, as I was saying, kind of the entirety of an industry. In your opinion, what would you say is a seminal moment over the course of the game's history? And Haughty, we'll start with you. What would you consider a seminal moment through the history of games that stands out to you?
For me, it's based on personal preference. When Maxis brought out SimCity, that for me was seminal, because it changed from that sort of that shooting type genre, that arcade genre, to something that was completely different. It was really the basis of simulation games, from then on. And so that was quite a turning point for me in rather, for my own gaming, and also what that meant for gaming in general. So, yeah.
Very cool. And Kate, how about yourself?
Gosh, there's so many to choose from, but I think for me personally, it was Halo, the first Halo, because I worked on the first Halo. I was at Microsoft, and for me, up to that point, I mean, as a geographer who's been doing culturalization work in games for a very long time now, up to that point, I kind of felt like I was just advising games, and I didn't feel quite as part of the development process. But as a gamer myself, and someone who really, really loves Halo, and still plays it to this day, it was that experience of working on something that you truly love, like really love so much. And I think that was the first time I really had that connection with the material that I was actually working on, and that it's carried forward now for the 20 odd years since the game has existed. And so it's very persistent with me. Plus the fact that I think for Halo, at least, it really was the game that redefined shooters and everything that has followed since then in terms of first-person shooters, which obviously have been pretty dominant in this space.
Very cool, and we've got some huge Halo fans on the show team, so you're lucky that we didn't know that in advance, and probably should have done our research. We would have just spent the whole show talking about Halo. But Steve, how about yourself? What's your seminal moment?
A pair of kind of like mostly narrative games. For me, it was more of a different kind of thing. It was the arrival of CD-ROMs, because it meant that so we could put so much more content in. We could actually record voices for the characters, and it was just a better way of telling our narratives in games. And that was quite early in my career. I mean, I've probably been in the industry just 2 years when this happened, but kind of like having to try and kind of fit everything onto half a dozen floppy disks, was quite a lot of work for the guys involved with the programming and such. Sort of suddenly to be given this amazing thing with CD-ROM was quite liberating in a way. It meant that we could think differently about the resolution of the game screens themselves. We could record voices, we could think about things differently. And I think, as a developer, that was a big thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting, probably one of the first examples of those kind of step changes that evolution of hardware and media enables. Obviously, from floppy to CD-ROMs, we've then had cartridges and DVD, and now we've got online media where we're essentially offering limitless size downloads now, which for better or for worse in various instances. But really good examples. So moving on, something I often ask people that I'm mentoring or interviewing is about who their heroes are. And invariably, people sort of look to the generation before them, or the pioneers of the sector, and they typically are older and more experienced. So I was really curious as to who you folks and who your games industry or sort of games influencing heroes would be. So Kate, who are your games heroes?
There's so many great people who work in this industry, which is really one of the reasons why when, I kind of had a chance to not work in this industry, I chose to stay in this industry. I would, some obvious names to me are people like Brenda Romero, even though I actually think I'm older than her. So, but that doesn't matter. I mean, I really admire her approach to games and to game design and basically just her as a person. Siobhan Reddy, who's with Media Molecule, has been amazing as well. People who've been a great example. Don Daglow, who's been around a very long time in this industry, incredible narrative designer and writer. There's a lot of people. These are people that I feel incredibly fortunate that I can mingle with them at events when we have events. But it's great to know these people and just to learn from them and to hear the stories and to just have a perspective on some of the early days of the industry. I mean, there's other people like Nolan Bushnell and others that I've met along the way who are also, really cool to talk to in their own right, because I mean, they are the ones that, forged this industry at the very beginning.
Very cool. And Haughty, how about yourself? Anybody that you look up to?
I probably speak more to the space that I work in, which is the content creation and the streaming space. And so I look at people who have been doing this for years and are still, I suppose, reaching out to someone like me who is not necessarily your stereotypical content creator. And that goes across to branding as well and across to PR. And they're taking that risk of saying, okay, we see you. You may not be what the normal demographic is, but we'll have a little chat with you, like you gave me a call. I appreciate those. I appreciate those people that are, stepping out and contacting people who may not normally get seen. So I respect those people, and I see the people who've been. It's just a hard space to be in, especially when you're a little bit older. And so those who've been doing this for a long time, I respect them because it's a hard slog.
Excellent. So I think we can all conclusively say that I'm your hero. I think is what I'm taking from that. No, I wouldn't say that at all. And Steve, how about yourself?
I'm not big on heroes as a term in general. There's lots of people I admire. I'm reluctant to, use the word hero because I think it's perhaps overused when, there are firemen and, sort of police officers and all, nurses and doctors and stuff like this. So we're all being real heroes. But having said that, there are a lot of people I do admire. It's impossible not to admire a lot of people because it is such a creative industry and so many people have done some great things. But so oddly, I mean, because I joined the industry at 35, a lot of the people who've been in it longer than me are younger than me. So it's crazy. So when I joined Revolution Software as kind of like this naive person who'd never used a PC before and had to kind of like make my way very quickly. I was very grateful for other people who helped. And one of those was a fantastic pixel animator called Steve Ince, and he was just so good at animating and so good at kind of like fiddling around with these chunky pixels on screen, which obviously because we were working at such low resolution was fantastic. And then another one is a friend of mine called Tony Warrener, who did a lot of system stuff. On games like Dynasty Sky and Broken Sword and so on, and sort of like he's been a friend ever since those early days, sort of, and it's people like that who kind of like are there from the early stages and know the nitty gritty stuff that sort of really then sets you up to for the rest of your career, really. Yeah. And I think that those people are important, as well as people like Charles Cecil, who gave me my first job in the first place, and sort of people like somebody Mike Bithell, who created Thomas Was Alone. People like that who kind of like are single-minded, in a very creative way and want to do their own little thing, And I think there's a lot of people like that.
Absolutely, I think it's a really good point that you make about they don't have to be people further on, older, more experienced. People doing amazing things are, they come in all shapes and sizes and from different walks of lives, ages, and yeah, we shouldn't be too proud to go, yeah, that person, they're younger than me, they're less experienced than me, but look at what they've achieved. I admire that, and I aspire to be like that. Absolutely. Talking of heroes, our heroes, absolutely, the people in the chat, people joining us. Just going to say hello to a few people. Miles, thank you. Mobin, lovely to see you. Nunab, Loina, Nanosphere, Emma, loads of you in there. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to put them in. I'll see if I can seamlessly slip them into the conversation, but no promises, because we all know I'm rubbish at this. Excellent. So moving on. So we've established this group chatting today, perhaps outside of the typical age for people within the games industry. I actually did, certainly in the UK at least, the UK census, over 2/3 of the UK games industry are under 35. So obviously, yeah, there's a wide range of years, and I do think that people like yourselves, we are taking games as a pastime, as an industry, into later years with us. I'm sure if you were to look the generation before yourselves, there wasn't an industry there to engage with in later years. So do you see any particular challenges for folks that maybe fall outside of that traditional target age bracket that spring to mind? Haughty, should we start with you?
I think it's good for example, for myself, people come into my channel, or they're aware of me, and they say, "Oh, thank goodness there's someone else my age." So they just want that validation, because I think that's what's missing. My own mother is a gamer. She'll be 79 soon. Wait a minute, she's 79. Better get that right. And so she's the only one in her circle of friends that is into gaming and knows about gaming. So I just think it's good to validate people. I think it's good to make the gaming industry and just generally society aware that many people have been gaming for all of their lives. And we talked about this earlier. People say, "Oh, you've discovered gaming," and I feel like saying, "Oh, pet, I've been here forever. You're the one that's coming along late." Not really late, but you know what I mean. So I think it's about validation that we are here and that we matter and we have a voice in development and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's about just the normalization of games as an entertainment form, and we are seeing that. I mean, pretty much every form of entertainment or media that's come along over the many years of humanity, it eventually gets adopted by everybody. I mean, the new media forms are released, the youth tend to adopt it first. I mean, whether it's rock and roll or radio or television or whatever it might be. But eventually it just kind of absorbs itself into cultures and is something that becomes, an activity that pretty much everybody does. I mean, it would have been unheard of, 50 years ago that people our age are listening to rock and roll. But of course now it's like, that's what we grew up with, so I still listen to U2 and the Police and Duran Duran, because that's the music I grew up with in the 80s and I love it. So, but back then it's just like, that was no, we don't listen to Elvis, we don't listen to any of that kind of stuff. So it changes, and just like today, it's just like we're the ones, we're part of that generation that were basically the digital nomads that came into technology, because when we were growing up, we had no cell phones, we had no computers, we had none of that stuff, and now here we are. And I think it basically just enabled a behavior that we were already into. I mean, we were already game players. I was playing, back in my high school days, I was playing like D&D and stuff like that far more than I was doing video games at that point. But I think it just enabled a behavior that has now becoming more and more normalized. And it's just a thing that human beings do now.
Let's see. And Steve, any thoughts from you?
I mean, sort of like the challenges to people is, sort of like, one of the things, I mean, you mentioned there that sort of like 2/3 was it of people are under 35, and I wonder how much of that is down to burnout. Sort of like unnecessarily demanding hours and things like this. Which is going to burn a lot of people out. So people have bad experiences and don't maybe last into more mature years just on that alone. But on the other side, if you want to enter the industry at an older age, you know, sort of, you can't help but feel that, hang on a minute, there's all these young people, and do I really want to enter this industry? But I think that any age is a good age to do something creative, and I don't think any of us should feel put off by you know, sort of like wanting to you know, sort of like make games. You know, sort of the idea that you want to create something that's interactive. You know, sort of like whether it's something simple like a, you know, sort of like a scrolling shooter, or, you know, something more complex with a narrative and something. You know, you shouldn't be put off. I mean, making games is not easy by any means, but anybody can learn these days, and that's the beauty of now, is that there are so many instructional videos online. I mean, there are good and bad, admittedly, but you can learn anything. I mean, there are tons of videos for learning Unity, for instance, or you can start something simple. You can write interactive stories in Twine or something like this. You know, so in many respects, you know, there are challenges, but don't let the challenge be yourself in a way, I guess. You know, so you know, embrace the industry if you want to, make your own little games, share them with friends, and maybe expand from there.
I think that's a really good point, and leads nicely on to the next point, which was I think you know, as an industry, we're becoming ever more conscious about diversity and inclusivity, and we've still got a long way to go, but I think, you know, we're taking the steps, and we've got the awareness bubbling through at the moment, which is great. And that, like you were saying about that kind of that barrier to entry, or that intimidation of joining the industry, do you think there's much to be said for contribution of diversity of age to what this industry produces in terms of the creative process? So Steve, we'll start with you, and then we'll get thoughts from others.
I think that diversity of age is needed much more in game, you know, sort of like game characters, because, you know, sort of like older characters in games tend to be a bit stylized, you know, sort of in the sense that, you know, you've got you know, they're either mentors or they're kind of like grizzled veterans who, you know, speak with a kind of gravelly voice and all this kind of stuff. So where are the women our age who, you know, kind of want to save the world, or, you know, through ordinary means, or the men our age, you know, sort of looking to kind of make a difference in the world and help feed refugees, or something like this, you know, sort of. It's not just about, you know, sort of, you know, toting a big gun and running like crazy everywhere. You know, sort of, we need people our age making more games, because there are people our age wanting to play these kind of characters, and play characters with richness, and play games with a different perspective, I think.
Definitely. So, Kate, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I find fascinating is that in the game industry, a lot of us, or most of us, are geeks in some form. I mean, we consume a lot of media like Marvel movies and Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and all that stuff. We just eat it up. I mean, obviously, look at my office. But the thing I always find fascinating is that in most of these narratives, the idea of a mentor is very, very common. You know, whether it's Obi-Wan or Yoda or, you know, Dumbledore, whoever it might be, there's almost always some kind of elderly mentor character that guides the hero, guides the main protagonists, you know, through their journey, and basically often provides life-saving advice to them. And yet, okay, so we accept that. We see that a lot in the media that we consume on a regular basis. But then in the workplace, we tend to just systematically or culturally reject the idea that people of age with that kind of experience and perspective are useful, you know. And I think a lot of it, especially in the tech sector, which games are a part, it's always that assumption that, well, technology changes so quickly that there's no way that somebody who's older can keep up. It's like, well, with that logic, I mean, there is a certain truth. Well, I mean, it is true that the industry does change quickly, but every industry can change quickly. Look at the medical field. Even look at what the medical field has gone through in the last 18 months alone in terms of the amount of change they've had to go through. So it's just, that's common in pretty much every industry, is that things do change. And so you just have to accept that fact. And age is not a barrier to that change. In fact, to me, the perspective that comes with age is a really powerful force that can be leveraged in any industry, but especially in creative ones like games, because we have that perspective on what came before, what mistakes were made before, and a lot of times those problems that we encounter, they're not technology based. We're talking about like storytelling and narrative design and visual design and things like that. These are things that are somewhat agnostic to a certain degree to the platform you're using or to the specific tool you're using. So I think for people to make the assumption that older people are just not useful because they don't know the new tech, it's really problematic. I think there are companies or people who take that approach are really shorting themselves on the utility of having people around with that kind of perspective.
Definitely, I can completely agree. And Haughty, how about yourself? Any thoughts on this?
I'm disagreeing with both Steve and Kate, and problematic, and I'll replace that with it's ageist. We were talking earlier before we started about subtle ageism in both language and behaviour. And getting back to the mentor, yes, always the mentor with Gandalf and what have you, but never the hero. We then that pass that on to the younger. We don't need to pass that on all the time. We can also be the mentor and the hero, or we can just forget being the mentor and just be, front and center. But I think this age is that, you can't keep up. And in my own space, I see that when people come in and immediately try to help me, do you need a hand with that? No, I'm good, I've got this. Do you need me to tell you how to play this? No, I'm fine, I've got this. There's the assumption with age that you can't, or that you'll take longer. And that's an ageist assumption. And it perpetuates that stereotype that we're not capable. We are quite capable.
I think that if I can just sort of jump in again, I think that's exactly right. But also, if we look at the mentor character, we should be also thinking of flipping it on its head. Sort of like if somebody wants to come into the games industry at our age and they don't have any experience in it, then they're going to have to tend to younger people as mentors. The people making the instructional videos and stuff like this. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I went to visit my grandson ages ago now. It was probably pre-lockdown, and he was playing Minecraft, and he was sort of like really getting into it, and I was just watching him and watching how he was doing it so easily. I mean, he was 6 at the time or something, 6 or 7, and it was just fantastic to watch. And I just learned so much just watching the way he was doing it. And if that isn't a kind of a young mentor, then I don't know what is.
And I think
the older people are not generally not afraid to kind of maybe admit that they don't know everything and that they can learn. And that's where sometimes younger people maybe don't have that experience to draw on, and kind of, because it is a competitive business, and they may be afraid to kind of admit that, I don't know everything.
And I think the fresh perspectives that can be brought with people who haven't grown up with this and aren't saturated and conditioned to all the norms and everything else. It's like, how liberating would that be to have somebody who has different life experience to bring to storytelling, to art, to game design, to mechanics. I think there's huge opportunity in that for sure. So looking, as you were just doing there, looking back to the beginning of a career, if you were starting out today, and for anybody who's watching this that is perhaps starting out today, do you have any thoughts or comments or advice as to how you might approach that with all your experience and knowledge behind you? If you had to go back to the beginning and start today in this day and age, what advice would you offer? Haughty, let's start with you, as you do something slightly different.
See the value. See your value in this space. I think it's often difficult, especially if you are a slightly different demographic, or you are trying to burst through past a stereotype. See the value that is you and what you bring to the table. Because often it's we talked about lived experience. As someone's a little bit older, you've got a lot of life experience behind you. You can bring that into this space. So value is what I would say.
Very cool. Kate?
I think I love the quote by Mark Twain where he said, "Comparison is the death of joy." And I've often used that with people I mentor, because I think honestly, especially in the creative industries like this, we get so caught up, especially I see this with younger people, They get so caught up in looking at other people's work and just getting into the imposter syndrome cycle and thinking like, I'll never be that good of an artist. I'll never be that good of a programmer. But it's a creative endeavor. So everybody approaches this differently. It doesn't matter if you all know Photoshop, you're all going to use it differently. You're all going to approach your art differently, or whatever your function might be. So I often encourage them, just stop worrying about what others around you are doing and just focus on doing the best you can do and improving your own skills. And I often, to the mentor point, when I tell them, I say, if you do see someone like in your classroom or at your workplace, if you're just starting out, you see someone who's you admire their work and you think it's amazing, well, guess what? You just found a mentor. Why don't you go ask them and say, hey, I love what you do. Can you show me how to do that? And don't be shy about it, even though I know this industry is full of all kinds of introverts. Like myself, I'm faking extroversion right now. But you have to kind of push yourself to go out and ask. And you'll often find, which is one of the things I love about this industry, most everyone is so helpful with each other. It's so collaborative. And if you ask somebody, can you show me how to do that? Or can you teach me this? Most everyone is just like, yeah, absolutely. Let's set aside some time. I'll be happy to show you how I do it.
Such a good point. And like asking somebody for help, it's a compliment to say, that's amazing, how have you done that? And people are flattered when they ask that.
Yes,
definitely, I completely agree. And to your point on imposter syndrome as well, we're so saturated with social media in all of the work that everybody is doing, and people compare their work with everybody's work. And you can't compete with everybody. You can only compete with you yesterday. Really, really good point. Steve, how about yourself? Any advice for somebody joining today?
Well, sort of like following Kate's advice, I think, so that's just brilliant. But I think that sort of, it's very, I think it would be very, bewildering for anybody joining the industry at the moment, because it is so big. It's such a big industry. I mean, it's, kind of like worth more than like film and music industries put together and things like this. And people forget that, that this is an enormous entertainment industry, but at the same time, sort of people can, make games on their own and all become part of a really good team. And the thing is not to be put off by that, kind of. But also, sort of whatever you do is just do it to the best of your ability. And, sort of every contribution to a project, no matter how small, is valuable, because, you never know which small contribution will make it fall apart if it isn't there. And we sometimes forget that. Absolutely. But also, whatever work you do, make sure you get a proper credit for it.
Definitely.
Sometimes people, forget this, and there are a lot of games that do not, kind of have proper credit, listings, which is a shame, because everything, as I say, is valuable and should be recognised as such. Absolutely.
And picking up on a couple of points there, and you mentioned earlier about how you can learn anything, and there's videos for everything online now. I think so to build on what you're saying about how the tools are readily available, you can do something by yourself. You don't need to wait to be given the opportunity. You can just start creating. You can start doing what you want to do, or experimenting. Is this what I want to do? You don't need to be given that role, that job, that opportunity. Start doing it, find out if you love it, and keep doing it, and eventually you'll definitely get noticed. And if it's for you, then that will become enabled. I'm just going to throw in a question we had from Nanosphere. So, complete curveball, because nobody's prepped on this. What would you say to people who are, games, they're for children, and lessers, this thing is for adults? So how would you propose people, and I can imagine for younger people maybe sort of trying to get into the games industry, they have to have that conversation a lot. I guess my first response would be signpost these people here, who definitely have something to something to say about that. But have yourself any thoughts on sort of addressing that challenging position? Kate, let's start with you.
Well, yeah, one thought right away is just quote simple numbers, the economics of it. It's like there's more women in their 30s and 40s who play games than teen males, and that's a fact. That's reality. And when I often quote that number, just that number alone to the public, people out there, they're like, no, that can't be true. There's no way that's true. I'm like, it is. That's the statistics. That's what we know. But because that's not the narrative in a lot of the media. I mean, especially non-games media. And there is that stereotype that most gamers are teen males in their mother's basement. We've all heard that trope over and over again, and it's just simply not true. It hasn't been true for over at least 10 or 15 years, actually. And plus, to Steve's earlier point, you look at the economics, it's like this is one of the fastest growing industries in the world. It is phenomenal growth, even during times of downturns, like the economic downturn of the 2008 and 9. It was still booming then. It's still booming now. Obviously, with the pandemic, it saw a huge year last year because people started to realize that I guess games actually have a place in our lives. It was interesting that just before the pandemic, the WHO was declaring that games are a potential disorder or, an addictive disorder. And then during the pandemic, they said games are actually a great way to deal with the stress of pandemic. It's like, okay, well, you can't have it both ways. You're going to have to figure that one out, WHO. But there's some simple facts about the industry that I think are pretty convincing.
Definitely. Haughty or Steve, either of you want to weigh in with anything? Haughty?
I can't top what Kate said. Kate said it all very, very well. I agree completely.
Excellent.
Sorry, Kate.
Thanks.
I don't think I have anything more to add to that, really.
Okay. So, Google games industry statistics and throw it in their faces. There's some amazing stats, and people have done the research, and you can, that's I definitely think is, I agree, that's a really good tool to tackle those conversations. Okay, well, we're nearly there. I've got the last one, which is the impossible question, which is where are we going next? So what do we have to look forward to? We've been there from the beginning. We've seen these huge milestones and these incredible achievements that have been made so far. What do we think is next? Steve, let's start with you. Any predictions for the future of the games industry?
I think that we'll see a blurring of the lines between games and other media. I think we're already seeing things like that with Bandersnatch and stuff like this. And I know people who are making interactive movies, sort of are making them work properly, for the first time and things like this. And people are kind of mixing live action into games, in clever ways, which, people tried this back in the 90s. But, kind of the technology didn't really deliver it in a proper way because, lack of memory and lack of, sort of like processor speed and things like this. So I think that we'll see an awful lot more and hopefully we'll get a lot more richer narrative and richer experiences, across all ages, stuff like this. I mean, one of the things that I like to do is kind of like, I do deliver workshops to kids and things like this. And kids latch on to this stuff very quickly. Even kids who don't have, are not known for their, kind of abilities in school. But those same lessons, those same workshops can also be delivered to adults. And I've done that, of different age groups. And so anybody can learn these things. And I think that we just encourage people to kind of like do things because they want to. Within the industry, and I think that we will see more variety and more diversity and sort of more of us old fogies, doing stuff.
Excellent. And Haughty, how about you? What are your predictions?
I think, touching a little bit on what we've all been saying, I think we'll see a normalization of the not only gaming but the importance of gaming. I'm a mental health advocate in this space as well, and so I think, especially on the tail end of the pandemic, when we start to come out of it optimistic, we'll see the important part that it played for our social connectiveness, for our mental well-being. And I think that will become more normalised and we'll start to break down those barriers about mental health and what video gaming and game development can do for us as a society. And that in turn will, have a ripple effect for some other areas. So I think that will start to happen a lot more.
Excellent. And Kate, how about yourself?
I'll just say the VR is the future. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm not going to lean into that. I mean, yes, of course, we're a technology-based industry, so any new technology that comes along, we will embrace it and see how can we use it. I do think we're going to see more than VR. I think we're going to see a lot more AR applications. Basically, how is gaming going to better integrate with the activity that we already do as human beings, rather than we stopping to play a game? And so I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff on the horizon with augmented reality coming along, of obviously, including devices that actually make it useful. I think that's part of it. The other thing I think that we're going to see sort of a return to a certain degree, and I think we're already seeing this, but is a return to the real community and social aspect of gaming that we had back during the arcade era. Because it's one of those things I describe to people who are younger. I look very fondly back during that golden age of the arcades, because we had no cell phones, we had no social media, none of that. So the arcade environment was our social network. That is where everything happened, where we saw our friends, where we hung out, we played games together. And that kind of environment, I see that somewhat being recreated in esports, like esports spectators and large communities that come together to play games. I think we're going to see more and more of that, because I do think, like, when the consoles emerged into the consumer market, it really splintered that community aspect to a certain degree. I mean, now it's all online, which I think is great. But I think with esports and some of the other things we're seeing, and of course this is all assuming there is no pandemic anymore, I think we're going to see somewhat of a resurgence of this kind of live community aspect that we used to have, which I think would be great, because I think the energy that we got during that time, it was really phenomenal to be in that kind of environment. And so I see that coming back to a certain degree.
Excellent. I completely agree. Right, well, I promised these folks that I would only take half an hour of their time. I've blasted way past that because I'm really enjoying this conversation. But yeah, we should probably wrap this up. So I'm just going to end by saying thank you all so much. It's been absolutely fascinating. Really good to hear from yourselves. If anybody wants to follow up with these people, if you take a look at our Twitter account, so Etch Play on Twitter, we've been sharing all of their contact details and their social handles, and we'll do that again after the show. So please do give these folks a follow. They're very inspirational and excellent people that I'm extremely grateful for. So thank you all very much for joining me today, and we'll be back next week, which will be our 1 year show. This is the 50th show. Next year is the 51st. We took 1 week off in the past year, so we're going to be having a little bit of celebration for that. But thank you all so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.